I was just thinking about this before we went on the air, partly because of that Joni Mitchell song. Call me at the station, the lines are open. The lines are always open. I mean, we don't have anything we can do to close the lines. Anyway, the lines are open today, whatever the hell that means. And it does mean that we have no guest today. That's a plan, not, nobody canceled. Because, in fact, we want to talk to the callers a little bit more than we typically do. Before we get to the callers and before we get to the first topic, I want to talk a little bit about callers and phones. This will be really fast. But so for 16 years, I worked in commercial talk radio where, in fact, the phones are super important. The phones were super important on that show. And we cultivated callers. Some of them became kind of little mini celebrities on the show. They had their own theme music, stuff like that. When I came over to public radio, I felt that there was kind of a different model here because, so often our producers, and I have just terrific producers who work on my show, and they often get these kind of just, A-plus level guests. And I feel like, the callers aren't their star anymore. The guests are the star because the guests have so much expertise. And I want to get all that expertise out on the air so you can hear it. So I haven't used callers. I use callers less than most public radio talk show hosts do, which is ironic because I came from an environment where I use them way, way more than anybody does in public radio. So I've been sort of wondering, well, how do I solve this? Because I do want to get callers on the air. And I think sometimes the best thing to do is what we're doing right now, which is just not have guests so the callers can really shine and have room to breathe. All right, so that means I have to stop talking so they can have room to breathe. Let me tell you the first couple of segments, I think, we're going to be talking about focusing on two of the stories about sexual harassment and maybe more than sexual harassment, the stories of comedian Louis C.K. And of Judge Roy Moore, now a candidate for U.S. Senate. I'm kind of hoping we can focus a little bit on Louis C.K. at the beginning, and then maybe in the second segment be focusing a little bit more on Roy Moore. But it's hard to contain these stories because it's not just those stories, obviously. It's all kinds of other stories. It's Kevin Spacey. It's Richard Dreyfuss now. It's all kinds of stars and producers, and I mean the common thread is all these people are famous, which is I think why these things are big stories. It's the stories of other politicians from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton. It's hard to contain these, and one of the things that I want to keep saying, you'll hear me say this more than once today. Every single one of these stories has a different fact pattern. They're not all the same story. There's a temptation to want to look at them as all the same story. But Louis C.K.'s story is different from Roy Moore's story, and Roy Moore's story is different from Roman Polanski and Woody Allen and Bill Clinton. And anyway. So there's a lot of questions, including how do you treat each one of these people, not how you treat these people or whether they can come back, because they don't have the same jobs. They're not looking for the same jobs. Louis C.K. doesn't have the same job as Roy Moore. Roy Moore is running for Senate. Louis K. is not running for Senate. Louis C.K. is not running for Senate. So all of these things, you have to kind of focus in on the exact fact pattern. I have a lot of things I want to say about each of these cases. But I also want to get you guys involved. So let me give out the number again. There's some people online already. And so it's 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. All right, so let's. We've already got a couple of calls here. I guess we'll go through them. I've got other things I want to bring up specifically about this. But here's John in Hartford. Hi, John. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. So I wanted to bring up a post that you had on your Facebook page about a month, I think almost exactly a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about Harvey Weinstein, and that had just broken, and talking about how you thought there was really overkill on the coverage.
Yep.
And you had a lot of people, I think, who agreed with you, some who did not. I was probably more in that group. But I'm wondering, I do think that, yes, they're all different, but I think there is a through line on all of this. And I think what some of the responses were is that the more we hear about this, the more we're going to hear more people willing to come out. So my question to you is, do you think there's still overkill on
No.
all this? And how did it change?
Well, yeah. So I've had opportunity to revise my thinking about that post. At the time, the only real story out there, I mean, there was maybe the producer at Amazon. That one had sort of come out a little bit. But, for what seemed like about 10 days, all anybody was talking about was Harvey Weinstein. And what did people think about this, and interviewing other people about what they thought about it. Ironically, some of the people who were just interviewed for comment now have their own sexual allegation fact patterns mounted up against them. But so at the time, it just seemed like, wow, there's an awful lot going on in the world. Puerto Rico is suffocating. Why are we only talking about Harvey Weinstein? But yeah, obviously, in the aftermath of this, I do see that there obviously is a larger problem in the entertainment industry. The one thing that I would say about this, one of the many things I would say about this, John, though, is, we're talking about all this because these are famous people. And that's fine. Famous people are the things that get you a magazine cover or get you a lead story on a TV newscast. That's how it gets. I mean, if this were about, a cocktail waitress in a nice restaurant or something like that who was being harassed, nobody would talk about it. And let's admit the reality is that women and men at times are being sexually harassed all over the place in much less powerful, much less prominent jobs. It's sometimes way worse than some of the things that have been alleged against, say, Louis C.K. I mean, the reason that this conversation is going on is because it involves a lot of famous and powerful people. And that's good. That's fine. It should go on. And famous and powerful people should be brought to heel and forced to talk about this stuff. But I would hate for it to gloss over stuff that I think is going on, in a much less prominent milieu, or lots of those milieu all over the country.
Do you think there's going to be any kind of a trickle-down effect? Because it seems to me that there is sort of an empowerment that people are feeling that, if these stars, if these other people are putting themselves at risk, and certainly, the girls in the Moore case are not exactly stars. He is, but they're putting themselves at quite a bit of risk. It seems to me this really may empower people, or women mostly, to come out, and certainly the men in some cases as well.
I hope you're right. I hope there is a trickle down effect. I hope an awful lot of other people who don't maybe have the kind of traction that some of these people now complaining have. Because let's face it, also, I mean, look, if you're some of the people who've lodged these complaints against prominent men, they're not as powerful as the men, but they're not as powerless as some of the people in very vulnerable occupations. I mean, if you're a maid somewhere, and God forbid you should be, a maid without legal papers somewhere, you are so helpless compared to, say, a comedian at some comedy festival in Aspen. So, but yeah, let's hope it trickles down. Let's hope people feel that they have the power and the courage to come forward too, and that they understand they don't have to put up with stuff like that. Here's Greg in Saybrook. Hi, Greg. You're on the air.
Greg?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, that's you.
Yeah, hey, this might sound, I like your former guest there. This may sound incredibly naive, but I do not understand how anyone can get anything out of having some kind of a relation where the other person doesn't want to be there. And if you could solve that, well, I think you'd have to solve the whole problem. But I don't get, it doesn't even compute in my mind.
All right, so let me say two things about that, or maybe three things. Let's say one of the, I have the same problem, which is why would this be fulfilling? That obviously, if we want to be in a sexual relationship with somebody, what's exciting about it is the mutuality of it. Nobody wants to be in a sexual relationship. Well, I wouldn't think, and you and I wouldn't think, Greg, that somebody would want to be in a sexual relationship with a person who was not attracted to us. I mean, that would be, I can't imagine anything more sexually enervating than that. We're not, unfortunately, typical of the entire human race. So there's one thing that I call the Louis De Palma principle. And Louis De Palma, you may remember, is the character played by Danny DeVito on the series Taxi. And he was this kind of unbearable, person of rather low moral character. And he, at one point, described something that he was in charge of the cabbies, if you never saw the show. He was the dispatcher and the guy who's kind of in charge of all these taxi drivers. But he had formerly been, of course, a taxi driver. And in one episode when they were sitting around talking about, sex and also driving a cab and how that comes up. Danny DeVito's character said, what I used to do is I'd be driving along. If there's a good-looking woman in back, I would say, how would you like to just go to my apartment and have sex? And one of the other cab drivers, probably Joe Hershko, said, did that work? And he said, yes, once. And there are a lot of guys like that. Like, they will do something, they will make a kind of overture that seems hideously inappropriate if they think it might work once. And even though other people might be totally repulsed by it. So there's sort of that. But, the other part of this is, when I look at some of these stories, and I think Louis C.K. is a great example, it does seem to me like he has a psychological problem, right? I mean, nobody normal does this particular thing. Louis C.K., just so we're clear, all of the accusations have to do not with him touching anybody, but with him touching himself in the presence of other people or while on the phone with other people that he didn't know, people with whom that was not an appropriate thing to do. What he really wanted to do in the presence of a woman to whom or toward whom he felt something, God knows what that something was, but what he wanted to do was to masturbate. And so that's what he did. And to me, that is suggestive of a psychiatric compulsion. And a psychiatric compulsion isn't necessarily a get-out-of-trouble-free card for everybody. But I do wonder how we include that in this kind of conversation. Because it's also easy to sort of say, all of these guys are creeps. And it's hard to refute that statement. All of these guys are creeps. But they're all different kinds of creeps. And the ones who clearly are battling some kind of weird demon that's making them do stuff like this, do you grant them any latitude? I mean, this is so difficult because there's so many overlays to this. And one of the overlays is one of the most incredibly cynical crisis management techniques in America today and for the last 20 years, when you are faced with something like this, is to say that you're going to get treatment. You're going to get treatment right now. In fact, you're in a treatment facility. Your spokesperson is answering questions for you because you have checked into a treatment facility. And I mean, the truth is, I suppose a number of these people do that legitimately because they recognize, wow, I have like a psychiatric disorder, which is now on the threshold of completely wrecking my career. I better go get help. And then some people say it because it's one of the things that you can say to keep the wolves at bay a little bit. And I don't know, I don't exactly know how to parse that. I mean, I look at Louis C.K. and I think, as Greg does, well, that seems like a very unrewarding activity. In other words, in terms of the things that can go on between consenting men and women, which this is not one of because they didn't consent. But when you think of the things that can go on between men and women, this strikes me as a very low reward, incredibly high risk activity. So why is he doing it? Why does he do it? And I assume he does it because he can't stop himself. Now, and this, of course, is something that he has incorporated into his comedy. In fact, before I take another call, I want to say one thing about the specifics of the Louis C.K. thing. The thing that makes Louis C.K. such an interesting case and such a troubling case is that he probably in the lead among modern American comedians anyway, is the person who talks about these dark places in the human psyche. And one of the things that he kind of invites us to do is to come into a somewhat safe space, which is the stand-up comedy routine, and talk about things that are troubling in an environment where we can laugh at something that's really dark, right? That's sort of part of the Louis C.K. bargain. The covenant we have with a comedian like this is, okay, we're going to take something that's really actually pretty depressing, and we're going to talk about it in such a way that we can laugh about it. And the reason that I can do this with you is that, yes, I am mining a certain part of my own psyche. I'm also mining my own observations of other people. But what I'm not doing is simply talking about something I actually do when I talk about these really extreme forms of behavior. That's not me, and it's not you, but it's something we think about. And so I'm going to get it out in the open in a way that we can all laugh at it. It's a bargain, something like that. And one of the things that he's clearly done is violate the terms of that unspoken agreement, that he is much more involved in this than he is detached from it. I do want to just play a little clip of Louis C.K. I started watching some of his old material over the weekend to see how it landed, I guess, now that we know what we know. So here we go.
A woman saying yes to a date with a man is literally insane and ill-advised. And the whole species' existence counts on them doing it. And I don't know how do women still go out with guys when you consider the fact that there is no greater threat to women than men? We're the #1 threat to women. Globally and historically, we're the #1 cause of injury and mayhem to women. We're the worst thing that ever happens to them. That's true. You know what our #1 threat is? Heart disease. That's the whole thing. That's it. Just our own heart.
So that was really pretty funny in a way, and he also is talking about something that's kind of real, a set of anxieties that exist between men and women on both sides. The problem is that he's much more a part of that problem than we had ever realized. I have more to say about this, but I also did want to get callers involved, and we haven't had a woman caller yet, so let's get that going too. Here's Sarah in Wallingford. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
So I wanted to kind of connect what one of your first callers said about that trickle-down effect. And while I think a lot of the good that's coming out of this is women feeling empowered to share their stories, I'm wondering what kind of trickle-down effect can be in place to help teach men and women to not commit these horrible things. And I think, Louis C.K., he's kind of coming from the angle that, well, there's nothing we can do about it because men are already just horrible human beings, and I will always be this way. And I just wonder if there's a place, if you think perhaps there's a place like in public school or in sex ed for people to be educated better on what is and isn't okay. We've got the idea, no means no, but then it kind of just, the conversation stops there.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think.
Well, let me say this first of all. One of the reasons that all of this is coming out right now in the entertainment industry and to a certain degree in the political sphere is that those are some of the remaining places where, in fact, there aren't conversations like this taking place. If you work almost any business environment in America, chances are either you or your supervisor has been through a very rigorous training on sexual harassment, and often the kind of training that involves an online course where at the end you have to answer questions and print out a certificate proving that you took this course. When I came here to WNPR, I went through, they have, some kind of outside consultant, and a whole bunch of us go to a class, and we take the class, and it has to be certified. Now, the reason that happened in the business environment had to do with the Chattanooga forklift case. I think that's the name of the case, and a lot of other big judgments. I mean, companies don't do this because they're so wonderful. They do it because they know they can be sued. Because long before this whole conversation started, there was another conversation that started, and it had to do with women seeking redress in courts. And the minute they started to get big judgments, everybody got religion about this. So,
well, sure, but again, I guess what you're talking about is the what to do when these things have already happened. But what about teenagers in high school? Is there a way to open this conversation to educate people to not become sexual predators?
Well, I would first of all, I don't think I am talking about what to do when this already happened. What I'm telling you is that companies all over America, because of a fear of exposure, want this to never happen. And so they rigorously train everybody. And if it does happen, of course, yes, then they want to be able to prove that they trained them, so it's their fault, not the company's fault. But basically, they want it to never happen. They don't want to go to court. So there is a big kind of prophylactic effort at the level of corporate America. But yeah, you're right. This should, if it doesn't go on in public health classes in public schools, it absolutely should. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's one of the ways that people. I think it also varies a lot depending on what part of the country you're in. Sure. And it shouldn't anyway. But thanks for that call, and thanks for making that point. You're absolutely right. One great trickle-down effect would be more education of young men in particular, so that they know that this is not cool. Here's Christina in Southington. Hi, you're on the air. Whoop, no, Christina's not on the air anymore. So let me just say a couple more things about the Louis C.K. part of this, which is, yes, this is going on in the entertainment industry because the entertainment industry is one of the most under-policed areas in America, probably. And, as Mark Maron said about this recently, I should also tell you, just to interrupt myself, that on Saturday night, I'm going to be on stage at the Bushnell as part of the Connecticut Forum with Mark Maron, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen. And there's just kind of no way that we can avoid this conversation, particularly because Tig Notaro was one of the comedians who first got the ball rolling about Louis C.K., and Mark Maron is somebody who knows Louis C.K. quite well and has interviewed him and is now saying that he feels very lied to over the years by Louis C.K. when he asked him, because these rumors have been bubbling for a long time, when he asked him. And one of the things that Maron said was, there isn't like an HR department. He didn't put it exactly this way, but what he's saying is comedy doesn't have an HR department. If you're working for a company doing comedy, they have an HR department. But if you're doing stand-up and going to comedy festivals and working in clubs and stuff, there is no HR department. So it's really one of the reasons why there is an out-of-control feeling about a lot of this stuff that exists less. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in corporate America. Of course it does. But it exists less in places that have put in safeguards. And as I said, they put in safeguards not because they're wonderful, enlightened people, but because they cannot live with those kinds of court decisions. Another thing I want to say about Louis C.K., and I don't know, people are processing this kind of stuff differently. This whole question of what do you say after the shoe drops? And I actually am kind of impressed by Louis C.K.'s completeness of apology. First of all, how many people ever say, yes, this all happened. All of it happened. He said that. Like Bill Clinton didn't say that, just for starters. Louis C.K. said that. There are people who don't like some of the wording of his apology. They feel as though it emphasizes too much the kind of admiration that was felt for him, that he feels allowed him to get away with this stuff. But in terms of things that represent a start, I think having somebody, Roy Moore is not going to do this. Having somebody come forward and say, yes, it's all true. To me, that's kind of a watershed moment. And I wonder how many other people are going to be able to do that. All right, let me grab one more call here, and then we'll take a break. We're going to come back to this topic, maybe a little bit more of the Roy Moore stuff after this. Here's Ben from Meriden. Hi, Ben. You're on the air.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
So I just wanted to call, give my quick 2 cents. I'm a hip-hop producer locally, and, I start to see things in the smaller end of the music industry that not necessarily everybody sees. By the time that artists become giant stars and famous and all that, you have to go through what we call the mud. Mm-hmm. And, particularly in the female form, when you see a lot of female pop artists or, rap artists, even country artists, you see that the sexualization of their brand it doesn't start immediately. It almost starts as a way to garner more attention. Mm-hmm. And it comes to a point where we almost expect it, that if you're going to be a famous female entertainment celebrity, you need to be sexually attractive. And men expect that. And we kind of, as a culture, expect that, which to me, I like to base everything off talent, but people just kind of expect that. And when you see it start at a low level, it's when maybe, there's a great singer and she can't get a gig, but someone who is willing to show a little more skin or just do something a little more provocative gets booked and gets to do more shows and more opportunities. You look at it and you say, well, where does that come from? And why is that entering our industry? Why is that there? And I think a lot of it goes back to what we're taught from the very beginning as men in our early years, and not necessarily what we see when we become the consumer of these in our late teens into our adolescence. So I don't know. I just wanted to make that comment, to show people not everything happens immediately.
Yeah. Although I feel like we're a little far off the path from what we're talking about. Now we're kind of talking about the male gaze part of this, and it's certainly not at all confined to music. There is a term that I can't say on the air. Let's say it sounds a little bit like snackable. And you may have seen the Amy Schumer, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Patricia Arquette, and whoever else. Oh, I can't remember who was the last person in that. But anyway, the great video they did about I think it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus's last day of being, shall we say, snackable. But, I mean, there's a standard that's applied to women in the entertainment industry that isn't applied to men. Men go on forever. I think in that same bit they talk about the fact that Bruce Willis is getting married to a baby lamb. That men just sort of are just sort of viable in that way forever. And that does have a lot to do with the male gaze. I feel like, although I'm sure that there's a way to connect all of that, it's a little bit different from what we're talking about the way in which some of the men in this industry feel as though they can take liberties that no sane person should think that he can take. Anyway, our number is 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. I'll try to flip this conversation a little bit more towards the Roy Moore part of it after this.
Kick off the sand flies, honey, the love's still flowing. If your head says forget it, but your heart's still smoking, call me at the station, the lines are open.
We are back. We are doing something we don't do probably often enough. And that is just talk to people on the phone, not book any guests. I mean, we're very proud of the way we put together shows and the guests we get and the conversations that we orchestrate here on this show. But that's no excuse for not talking to callers, too. So that's what we're doing today. There's no guest. The number is 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. We're talking about certain facets of the national conversation that started, I think, with the Harvey Weinstein allegations or revelations and has spilled out over onto George Takei and Kevin Spacey and Richard Dreyfuss and Dustin Hoffman and a whole bunch of producers I never heard of and Brett Ratner and Jeffrey Tambor maybe. And I mean, it just like pick somebody now. It seems like there's a set of charges that goes along with the name. So it may be easier to ultimately name the people who don't seem to have this problem. All right, so here's, and I do want to sort of flip from there a little bit to the Roy Moore stuff, which I feel has some differences that are worth accentuating and talking about, and implications, too, that are worth talking about. But one or two other people want to talk about this part of it. Here's Amy in Hampton. Hi, Amy.
Hi. I just wanted to make the distinction between sexual attraction and power, because I think a lot of the men that I've been talking to about this expressed what your earlier caller did, which is that they don't understand why someone would be interested in a non-consensual interaction. And I think that the point that this is, when we talk about rape, we're talking about violence, not sexual attraction. Mm-hmm. And I think that in these cases, it's about power. It's not about attraction or sexuality.
It certainly, I mean, once again, it certainly is in an awful lot of these cases. I as I said at the beginning, I hate the term these cases because each one of them is kind of different. I would agree that power is something that runs through a lot of it. And, once again, going back and watching Louis C.K.'s material this weekend was so interesting because it's really like he just laid the whole blueprint for what we're talking about right now. He just didn't explain what he had to do with it. So there's another part. I can't remember whether it's from the same comedy special that we played a clip from before, where he talks about the difference between somebody who was good looking in high school and somebody like him. And he said, if you're good looking in high school, you're going to get a lot worse looking probably as it goes along. He goes, he's pointing to himself. He goes, I looked like this in high school, and it really didn't work in high school. It didn't work to look like this. And then he talks about power and attainment and income as ways in which the game changes. And I can't remember how he does it, but he has a little equation of something plus something over income squared or something. This kind of notion that as men attain other things and some of their insecurities about earlier stuff fall away, that they become more attractive, which I think is a story that men tell themselves. It's not necessarily a story that women can always identify with. But
I would agree. Yeah. I think it's really important to make the clarification, though, that this is not that whatever kind of sexual stimulation these men are getting is wrapped up in notions of power and aggression and violence.
Right.
That this is not some simple sexuality. It's not somebody or some people who have strange sexual picadillos. This is really about a power dynamic, not about sexuality.
I think that's quite fair. All right, we're going to take a call. I would like to switch a little bit away from, I mean, the Louis C.K. thing is fascinating. I could talk about it all day. I would quickly add, I really want to see the movie that they are now withholding. You know, the I Love You, Daddy movie. It was going to debut, was going to premiere last week. Now it's been pulled off the market. Some of that might be financial self-protection by the studio. But I feel like, Bitsy Kaplan, our producer, said there's an attempt at erasure here. You know, that one of the things they try to do is sort of say, all right, let's do the equivalent of wiping away all traces of our involvement with this person ever. And I am actually very curious to see that movie. In his comedy, it seems as though he's built into that some of the qualities and questions and dark places that we're talking about in a very real way about right now. All right. So another part of this story, another aspect of the story last week was a similar but by no means identical story about Roy Moore, the judge who's now running for Senate from Alabama. These stories, and they come from multiple accusers, seem to involve him courting, and sometimes, at least on one occasion, more than courting, actually touching, and what I would consider to be some version of sexual assault on teenage girls, 14-year-old girls. So, and this is one of these cases where, I mean, keep in mind, this is the guy who had the Ten Commandments up in his courtroom. This is the guy who positioned himself as a trumpeter of good morality and a censor of bad morality. This is the guy who wanted to restore God's law to this nation and was prepared to put up a big fight about it. And long ago, I asked Thomas More, not that other Thomas More, the Thomas More who wrote The Care of the Soul and other books like that. But this is way back in the 90s. And it was, I think, sort of right after the Jim Baker stuff and the Jimmy Swaggart stuff, and there were some other things like that going on at the time. And I said, why is it? Why is it when they're like talking about family values, when they're talking about our decaying moral structure and they're deploring it and saying that they want to do something about this, that, you can just start an egg timer before they're caught with a donkey and a bowl of Jell-O or something. It just happens every time. And he said they've already acknowledged the power that this material has over them. They've already acknowledged the fact that their gaze is drawn to this material. They just haven't been honest with you about what it means to them and how much it means to them and what they're actually doing about it too. And I think that is at least part of the answer here anyway. And all right, so we've got David and Joyce. We'll get to all of you. Hi, David. You're on the air.
Oh, hi, Colin. Thank you for taking my call. I've been fairly pleased to see that a lot of the outcry against Roy Moore has been from Republicans. Mm-hmm. In fact, most of it, all of it.
Mitch McConnell today said he believes the women. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I know. I just heard that. But I also read this morning, and this is from Fox News, and they never fail to disappoint, but they're apparently lining up to support Roy Moore. And Laura Ingraham in particular said something to the effect that, I think, kind of waving off progressives, saying, I have two words for you, Bill Clinton. And I don't know why she didn't pick Louis C.K. or Harvey Weinstein, but they may be stuck somewhere. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on that dynamic of Fox News somehow sticking their head up on this to support the guy.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, Fox News just lived through Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly. Right. I mean, this isn't something where they have to go looking across the landscape to find some part of it. And they got rid of those guys, too. Yeah. They got rid of those guys, because, first of all, they were paying out these incredible judgments, and they don't want to pay out any more judgments. I mean, you get rid of those people because you can't afford to have them around anymore. So, Fox News, that's their answer in-house. Now here, I think Fox News, look, these are businesses. They're all about ratings. So what's Fox News going to get more ratings from, given what its demographic is, given what its audience is? Well, probably seeing if they can turn the Roy Moore story around has a bigger payoff for them at the ratings casino than going along with everybody else about it. You know, I mean, their audience would be interested in and gratified by a way of turning this story around. All right, here's Joyce in West Hartford with an excellent point. Hi, Joyce.
Hi. I don't understand how you can have this show, and I listen to you every day, and you can mention George Bush, and you can mention Clinton, et cetera, and you fail to mention the president that went on television and said that this is what he does.
Right. Although, to be perfectly accurate, he didn't go on television.
He was on television. I saw him on television.
Well, no. So what you saw, just so we talk about this accurately. I mean, you're absolutely right. Donald Trump should be part of this conversation too.
No, he should be the part that gave everybody permission to act this way.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Okay, first of all, I just want to clear up the fact pattern here. So the television part of this was that he and Billy Bush were sitting on a bus prior to an All Access Hollywood or whatever Access Hollywood appearance. Trump doesn't know there's audio running, and he's talking about this stuff. He's making the famous.
Perfectly honest.
Yeah, he's making all the pussy grabbing comments and stuff like that.
Perfectly honest.
Right, which should have destroyed his chances of becoming president of the United States. He got elected anyway, despite the fact that everybody knew about that. Think about that. Think about what that means. That's another pretty interesting part of all this. But let me just talk about. I don't want to be over selective about this. And to be honest, I think all of us on the left need to look back at how we handled the Bill Clinton situation in the late 1990s, because that came before Donald Trump, right? And although as I look back at what I said and wrote at the time, I didn't make endless excuses for him. But I mean, it's this problem isn't confined to one party or the other. And certainly we know one thing that Bill Clinton definitely did. He did it with Monica Lewinsky. It's just now a matter of record. And he lied about it when he was asked point blank about it. I'm inclined to believe the Paula Jones story, which I might add parenthetically is an awful lot like the Louis C.K. story in its fact pattern. I'm inclined to believe the Paula Jones story. We'll never know for sure. I never really thought Kathleen Willey was a particularly effective charger against Clinton for reasons that would take too long to go into. And the Juanita Broaddrick thing is one of those things that's so long ago that I think it's hard to mentally adjudicate that question. But yes, Donald Trump absolutely deserves to be part of this conversation. But so does Bill Clinton, right? Bill Clinton, when we went through the 1990s, when the Starr Report came out, and we realized that a president of the United States was using the Oval Office for this stuff, you could argue that one of the places this quote unquote started was then.
Maybe it started then.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about now.
Yeah.
I'm not one of your big liberals.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe in morality.
Yeah, me too.
You've got the king of anti-morality, and you're talking about Louis C.K., who's just a comedian. This man's in a foreign country representing you.
No, I totally agree. Although I actually don't think there is such a thing as just a comedian. Oddly enough, people like Louis C.K. have a lot to do with shaping our attitudes and shaping how we look at things, and we often, cite their work when we talk about our own attitudes about things. I don't know that there's such a thing as just anything. There isn't no such thing as just a movie producer. There's no such thing as just a comedian, and for that matter, there's no such thing as just a restaurant owner or just a forklift company owner. I mean, everybody ought to be made responsible for their behavior and for their actions. Women shouldn't be especially victimized because it's somebody really famous. We should understand that women are being victimized all the time by people who aren't famous, and that's important too. There's no such thing as that word just, at least not for me. Here's Janet in Woodbridge. Hi, Janet.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
Well, the whole Roy Moore thing is just beyond belief. When I read the Washington Post story, it describes how he's 32 years old, and he picks out this 14-year-old who he knows is vulnerable. He tells the mother, you're going into this hearing. She shouldn't hear such things. He's grooming her. This, to me, I don't know how else to think of it other than this is pedophilia.
Mm-hmm. It is similar to the Michael Jackson story to a certain degree, and it's certainly similar to so many of the stories that we heard about the Roman Catholic Church. I don't know how it's not pedophilia. I mean, it fits the description. And yes, and vulnerable victims
no
are key.
No normal man in his 30s should be looking to date high school girls.
No. I mean, no. You're right. And they can argue all they want about how well it's different in the South, or I love the Bible argument about this. The state auditor of Alabama said that it's okay because in the Bible, Zachariah was older than Elizabeth. By the way, that's not in the Bible. And that Joseph was older than Mary. By the way, that's not in the Bible. That's something he heard about somewhere, but neither one of those things is true. And even if it were true, it is not a defense for dating 14-year-old girls in the 20th or 21st centuries. All right, so Janet, thanks for calling. We have to take a break. I will have to search my soul, and Bitsy Kaplan will search her soul. Do we want to keep talking about this for the rest of the show? Do we want to switch topics? I don't know. You guys have a lot of good calls, so maybe we should just stay with this.
My ears are glued to the radio for my favorite call-in show. What's my opinion? You want to know? You're gonna have to listen to the radio.
Today's show was produced by Betsy Kaplan with help from me, Kyone Wolf. Our intern is Ashley Taylor. The part of Bill Curry was played by Charlie Sheen. On tomorrow's show, revisit our conversation about the domestication of foxes and whether or not that's a good or bad idea. It's a very bad idea. And now, back to Colin.
Yes, we're going to be revisiting a show that we did this summer, it includes the domestication of foxes and these Russian experiments where they tried to breed a fox that could live with people and like people. They also tried to breed foxes that were like foxes from hell that would really hate people too. People, they ignore that part of the experiment sometimes. All right, our number is 860-275-7266. The time is short enough and the phones are bright enough so that let's just keep talking about this. One of the questions that I also want to put out there, if you want to call 860-275-7266, 860-275-7266, is how do we as a society decide who gets to come back from this? Like I could imagine a year from now, Louis C.K. doing a 1-hour HBO special or something that's mostly based on this incident, in which in his self-lacerating and dark way, he talks about everything that happened and what happened when the press crisis broke, when the media got a hold of the story, and without appearing to give himself any kind of pass on this, turns it into fodder for the kind of comedy that he does. I could imagine that at least as an idea on somebody's drawing board. And I do wonder, who gets to come back and who doesn't. I would point out that Marv Albert, who I like, I like Marv Albert. He's a sports announcer, if you never. He was the legendary basketball sports announcer of all time at one point. And he had a case that's worse than any of the things that we've talked about, that seemed to involve, first of all, biting somebody and probably forcibly, at the time, I think they used the phrase sodomizing. I'm not really sure that that's the phrase they would use now. Anyway, he came back. He's working. He's got a network job. So there's that whole question: who survives this and who doesn't, and why, and how do we set standards about whether people can be rehabilitated and can rehabilitate themselves? All right. So here's Daniel in Connecticut. Hi, Daniel. You're on the air.
How are you, Colin? Been a big fan of your show for a while. It really resonated with me the last conversation you had with your last guest, who seemed to kind of purport this as a evidence of some issues that maybe our current president has put forward. But as you pointed out, which I really can recognize, this is not exactly maybe not in the same level of brazenness. But this is an issue in the 90s that was pretty significant, and I almost wonder if there's been a certain level of acceptability within this mind frame just due to a left-leaning government associated with Clinton for the past 20 years, and I certainly don't believe that's necessarily the case, but I think it's worth examining that maybe those who kind of fell within that political realm felt somewhat, that this was maybe not acceptable, but at least drew some degree of, credence, if you will.
I think that's a little bit too broad a brush or too simplistic a way of talking about it. Because first of all, I don't think this stuff is confined to one political party or another. And whether if we're talking about a left-leaning environment, well, first of all, Barack Obama, you never know. I guess you can't rule out anybody. I guess you have to say that now. But I will be shocked if, any story like this about Barack Obama ever floats to the surface. I don't think it has much to do with party. It has more to do with personality and psyche. And in terms of the left, look, the left shouldn't let ourselves off the hook if we made excuses for Bill Clinton, if we made arguments on his behalf, if we went too far in making those arguments. But, one of the other things that the left can lay claim to in a way that the right cannot is the steady empowerment of women and the passing of laws and the advocacy of laws that make it possible for women to seek redress in these situations, and the appointment of jurists who will act on behalf of women in these situations. I think that's much more something that grew out of quote-unquote liberal policies than it is something that grew out of conservative policies. And so, yeah, I don't know. But I hate trying to divide it up that way. I don't think it's a partisan problem. I think it's a societal problem. I think it's a problem we all have. We can't shove it over to the other side and say, no, it's those guys. It's their fault. All right, so I probably have one more call left in my quiver here. Here's Alyssa calling from Massachusetts, I think. Hi, Alyssa.
Hi.
You're on the air.
So I wanted to talk about how I think we need to have a conversation about how people like Roy Moore and there's been others too whose names that kind of escape me at the moment. I think it was the Duggars and stuff. They blame the LGBT community, especially the transgender community, which I'm a part of. I'm a transgender woman, and I'm getting tired of being blamed for this kind of stuff. And they're the predators. I mean, these are monstrous predators that do these horrible things, and they go, oh, well, you can't go into a bathroom because you're going to assault a child. And they're the ones, oh, look at that. They're assaulting a child. I mean, that's one of those, oh, surprise, surprise, yet another one of these complain the loudest, but yet they're the ones that are doing the predation,
Yeah, no, first of all, it's a great point, Alyssa. Thanks for calling and making that really great point. And it's kind of what we've been saying in other contexts all along. I mean, when there was, a decade or so ago, a national debate about gay marriage, a lot of us kept saying, it's not as though us heterosexuals have done a really great job safeguarding the institution of marriage. We've done a really crappy job we really can't point to marriage as something that we have been faithful shepherds of and something that has flourished under our stewardship, and so you're absolutely right. If you want to look at this whole thread of stories, not just Roy Moore, but kind of, all of the heterosexuals in these stories, who is more dangerous in a bathroom,
right. I would be more afraid of a guy like Roy Moore or somebody like that going into a bathroom with my child or even being around my child, and it's like, oh my God. And then you hear these other people, the sheriff, I think it was out in the West, was up for election, and he was like, me and my gun will take care of the problem if I ever catch one of these quote unquote people in the bathroom, advocating open violence. And the more disturbing thing is people are kind of like, some people, I should say, are okay with that. They're like, oh, yeah, that doesn't bother us. Go ahead and elect him. We know he's obviously a person who advocates violence against people that are innocent. And then, oh, look at that. Oh, allegations of misconduct with a minor child.
Well,
it's mind-boggling.
Yes. Well, yeah. First of all, again, thank you for calling and making that point. It's a really great point. And this whole bathrooms thing, I just have never understood it from the word go. We're pretty much out of time, but I worked at a newspaper in the 1980s where there was, I think it was the late 1980s, maybe early 1990s, where there was somebody going through a sexual reassignment, as they called back in those days. And when she was ready to start using the women's room, the women started flipping out at the newspaper. And I thought, do you have any idea how terrified this person is going into the bathroom? How scary an experience that's going to be as she starts to use the women's room in public places. Who cares about you guys? She's not going to do anything to you. She's going to be more nervous than anybody. Calm down. transgender people do not go into bathrooms looking for trouble. They go to bathrooms hoping that nobody will be horrible to them. Anyway, we have to stop there. But thanks for calling. Thanks for being part of the conversation. If you liked it, well, we'll do it again. I like stuff like this. Thank you.